With the end of One Piece finally in sight, years of world building and plot threads are weaving together towards what is arguably the most anticipated climax in shonen manga history. The days of theorizing its biggest mysteries are slowly slipping away, so here's my 2 cents on how I think the final elements of the plot will come together to conclude the story. Alright, so I've divided it all into 4 sections covering key mysteries that resolve the story's final plot points. These 3 sections here I'll have to group together to talk about separately later on, because they tie into everything else and are easier to talk about when looking at everything as a whole. So starting with the Void Century conflict. If you think back to Vegapunk's 14-chapter long broadcast, it contained a very vague forecast of impending chaos, as well as strange apologies with minimal crucial details conveniently cut off. And most of the time, he was giving excuses as to why he couldn't speculate further from the available facts he had. The most valuable parts are highlighted here. The first 5 of those highlights are all points Vegapunk reiterates throughout the broadcast. He explains he's not here to convince anyone that there is a bad guy. Instead, he insists on staying neutral, refusing to slap good or evil on those who sentenced him to death for researching the Void Century, because apparently he knows too little about a certain him. He then shares his dream of endless energy to bring about world peace, but says it was his first sin and that he flew too close to the sun. He again avoids good and evil labels when judging the ancient conflict, calling it a clash of 2 ideologies with an unknown cause. He then goes into more details about his first sin, apologizing and blaming himself for the indirect harm caused by having his life's work stolen and misused. Lastly, he questions why Joy Boy preserved 3 dangerous ancient weapons, contemplating how good and evil applies when indirect and unintentional harm is to account for. Reading this, it seems like Oda has made a direct callback to the events and lessons learned in the Water 7 saga. When you revisit these events, you realize that Oda has already provided an answer to Vegapunk's moral dilemma. You start to realize why Vegapunk struggled to identify a cause for the ancient war, as well as why he couldn't place good and evil labels. Now, with the addition of Vegapunk's message, Oda has given us 3 key events that provide insight into some of the nuance in the Void Century's conflict. Each conflict follows the same pattern of the world government exploiting the creator's works as vessels for subversion. Only difference between the scenarios is the vessels in question. In Franky's backstory, battleships are stolen by CB5 and used to stage a false flag attack on a judicial ship to frame Tom, who is a shipwright they wish to detain as they seek the blueprints he holds of the ancient weapon Pluton. Iceberg, who now fears what will happen to Tom, blames Franky's creations, arguing that powerful weapons should not exist, regardless of what the intention was behind their creation. This posits the reader with a moral question. Is creating a powerful tool inherently sinful, regardless of the creator's intent, due to the risk of it being misused by others? Tom rejects this, passionately defending a creator's pride in their work. He strikes Franky for disowning his ships, and by example, says he is proud that he built the Oro Jackson for Goldie Roger, even when he is facing execution. The people of Water 7, swayed by the government's framing, vilify Franky, dismissing his pleas that Spandam orchestrated the attack. And just like that, Tom and his workers are the bad guys. In Robin's backstory, the government justifies annihilating Ohara by branding its scholars as devils who intend on destroying the world with ancient weapons, effectively turning the people against them and making them fear them. Ironically though, the government seeks these weapons for themselves, exploiting the very history that they suppress. Clover sees through all this and reveals that the government's excuses are flimsy and designed to fearmonger and turn the public against scholars. Even Iceberg, who is skeptical of the government, initially buys into this narrative, warning Robin that her ability to read poneglyphs endangers the world, and so her dream to learn history is selfish. But Franky, having fully absorbed Tom's wisdom, rejects this in chapter 375 when he urges Robin to escape and rejoin her friends, but she refuses, believing that her own existence endangers them due to her enemies. Franky counters that by saying her existing is not a crime, that the real threat is the government, which brands her a criminal, framing her existence as a danger to justify her persecution. And lastly, in Vegapunk's broadcast, Vegapunk describes his discovery of the Mother Flame as a sin, the power source that was later stolen by the world government to activate an ancient weapon and destroy Lelouchia. In his broadcast, he apologizes for dreaming of an enriched future, describing his ambition as flying too close to the sun. This metaphor echoes the events in the first world of the Harley text, where mankind succumbs to greed, touches the forbidden sun, causing ruin. Yet Vegapunk's selfless intent likely mirrored the Mother Flame's original purpose in the Void Century, to uplift, not destroy, while the government's stealing and misuse of the power echoes the line of man succumbing to greed. I also believe that the world government's theft and misuse of his creation parallels the events that led to the erasure of the advanced civilization that was likely also framed as a threat to justify its annihilation. Tom's teachings to Frankie in Water 7 clarify this. No matter what kind of ship it is, the act of building it isn't a crime, and a creator should be resolutely proud of his creation. Therefore, the problem lies with those who intentionally misuse power. Otahime in the Fishman Island arc describes Poseidon, a power inherited by a mermaid princess every few centuries, as guided by both the princess and a prophesized individual for good, emphasizing that its impact depends on the intention of its use, not its existence. And notably, while she acknowledged its potential to also be destructive, she never called it a weapon. The world governments claim that such sources of powers incentivizes greed is a deliberate misframing, deflecting blame from their own choices. Power like the Mother Flame or Poseidon is neutral. Greed is a human failing, not its inevitable result. So by vilifying creators like Vegapunk or the Void Century civilization, the government justifies its control, as seen in Water 7's false flag against Tom's crew and Ohara's demonization. I believe ideological subversion explains why Vegapunk avoids moral labels. While Vegapunk himself was part of the government, we certainly don't place him in the same category as the world nobles who lead the government, and the Void Century's conflict was most likely also not a clear-cut battle of good versus evil, but a complex clash of ideologies muddied by manipulation. Ideological subversion refers to the deliberate manipulation of beliefs, values, or perceptions to control or destabilize a group by distorting truth and spreading propaganda. In One Piece, its use by the world government ensures that ordinary citizens never hear the wisdom passed down from figures like Tom or Clover, as it represents a suppressed ideology systematically eradicated along with its bearers. By gaslighting the public into viewing knowledge itself as an existential threat, the government is able to mobilize the entire world against its chosen enemies. I believe that's how they managed to mobilize a provisional army of 20 kingdoms to fight at their side against Joy Boy and his allies. Oversimplifying morality is a huge tactic of ideological subversion that the world government loves to use, like painting pirates as villains to prevent defecting from their rule. To make things more complicated though, pirates who lack a moral code and pillage and plunder over innocents only serve to validate the government's narrative. Innocent people who have been affected by pirates find great value in the Navy, which largely does consist of good-natured Marines. Meanwhile, those who suffer under the Navy's corruption, when Marines abuse power or when nobles exploit their status, they find solace in pirates who redefine piracy as the pursuit of freedom. Pirates like Blackbeard, with ambition to control, mirror the world government's own greed, revealing that labels like pirate, marine, or noble cannot be reduced to good or evil, as each harbors both, and we've seen examples of good and evil within each of those categories. This does partly explain Vegapunk's struggle to identify a cause and a bad guy when addressing the Void Century's conflict. All he could see was the clashing of two ideologies. But we, the readers, already know all about the ideology of the ones who remain to rewrite history, so not much really needs to be said. They're governed by an ideology which its very foundations are so fragile it can only survive on lies, as even those who serve under it eventually come to realize that its practices are as illegitimate as its founding. In chapter 793, Fujitora quotes, "If you don't want justice to be dishonored, keep it close to you at all times. If we lose credibility just by admitting fault, we didn't have any in the first place." But amidst all this division, one figure stands out. As Mihawk observes in chapter 561, Luffy possesses what he describes as the most formidable ability in the world: to turn anyone around him into an ally. Pirate, marine, warlord. Without trying, Luffy's infectious moral code of loyalty, respect, and overall sincerity and love for life unites people across divides. Unlike Blackbeard or the government, who struggle to find fulfillment without control, Luffy seeks not to rule, but to be the freest man on the sea, embodying what is likely the suppressed ideology of the erased civilization, who lived in unity and freedom. The ideology that Clover said the government fears will put an end to their rule. if the people of the world come to remember it again. So I have no doubt that the same deceitful tactics the world government used to frame Tom and his workers, the same ones that they used to justify the annihilation of Robin and the O'Hara scholars, those same tactics that they used to silence the voices preserving the wisdom of the past that never managed to reach Vegapunk, is what led Vegapunk to believe that his creation was a sin. Distorting the truth to maintain control is the methods the entities behind the world government employed to turn the world against the advanced civilization, erasing its legacy of unity and freedom by misrepresenting the purpose behind each power sources in order to prevent it from enriching the world they wish to control, essentially corrupting and destroying the sacred energy source that was never meant to be used for such purposes. One thing to keep in mind, as noted by Vegapunk and the Five Elders, is that the conflict is ongoing, as the world government still hasn't achieved its goal of extinguishing the era of pirates that constantly reignites. Rob Lucci confirmed this in Water 7 when he told Iceberg that the government's intent to obtain the Pluton was to end the pirate era. And following one of the most recent One Piece chapters, 1155, Rox reveals to King Harold his ambition to seize Hachinosu and create a pirate paradise, aiming to crush the Marines and become the king of the world, a dream that we know is inherited by his son Blackbeard. So then, Emu, Blackbeard, and Luffy all clash because each seeks a world where they are the most free and their allies thrive. Yet their definitions of freedom are starkly different. Luffy's goal as Pirate King isn't to dominate or plunder, like Blackbeard. He craves freedom and joy for himself and his friends. Blackbeard, however, pursues power, treating relationships as strategic tools, much like Emu and the world government, who are prioritizing their royal circle's dominance over others. And although both Blackbeard and Emu are driven by materialistic ambitions, all three of their visions, Luffy's, Blackbeard's, and Emu's, are essentially the same goal of ultimate freedom expressed in starkly different forms. In chapter 1121, Emmett apologizes to Joy Boy for failing to make him king. Given that pirate doesn't have one fixed definition, with categories like peace mains and morganeers, I wonder if the same applies to the word king. Luffy wants to be the pirate king, yet he has no interest in ruling over anyone. That's why it feels confusing when Emmett apologizes to Joy Boy for not making him king, because under today's ideology, king implies dominance and authority. But maybe the ideology of the lost civilization had an entirely different understanding of what it means to be king. That would make sense, especially considering how much of the world of One Piece is still shrouded in mystery, like the recent revelations that rainbows are actually saleable, something previously unimaginable to the average person in One Piece. But I wonder if a figure like Rox and Blackbeard also existed during the Void Century's struggle for supremacy, and perhaps it really was the legendary Davy Jones. Emu is the only figure out of those three who remained static, while the cycle of new generations and new eras continued to pass down the dreams of previous generations. Kinda makes me wonder if, had Davy Jones won during the Void Century, and both Emu and Joy Boy lost, who would inherit Emu's will in the present, if there was a person to inherit, since these figures seem to keep reincarnating every few generations. Anyways, all this makes me wonder if the reason the conflict persists is because of the world's laws of balance and cycles. Defeating the advanced civilization at one time is one thing, but fighting the cyclical nature of renewal is a whole other struggle for Emu and the Five Elders, who are in direct resistance with the laws that maintain balance, and that are likely linked to the energy source that they are gatekeeping or suppressing. Which brings me to my next point. What is this ancient energy source that sits at the heart of all this conflict? To answer that, we first need to unravel the intangible mysteries, the voice of all things, the innate power source of Joy Boy's heartbeat and rhythm that awakens ancient tech, what devil fruits truly are, what energy actually is, why Emu and the Five Elders fear death, and why Einstein, the real-life Vegapunk, didn't. Shinto mythology holds a crucial clue as to why Luffy is the key to bringing back the sun. His rhythm, his inherited dream, both cooperative components that will restore it and bring about a new dawn. Amaterasu, the Japanese sun goddess who returned from hiding when she heard the music and laughter of a divine party, restoring light and banishing the yokai that had roamed the earth in her absence. I'll be diving into all of this in a future video because animating takes a load of time. There's a lot to unpack, myths, legends, theories, so stay tuned.